area at the end of the war, which meant that we didn't have really total control of our own currency, which is absolutely vital if you're going to be an effective Chancellor. Secondly, we had this totally independent group of trade union barons who could do things which often their rank and file didn't agree with at all.
Did you sometimes privately share with a view which was common in media and commentary circles, that the country was close to ungovernable?
Well, it was not easy to govern. Ungovernable, I think, is exaggerating it enormously, but it was very difficult to govern at that time.
And who was were the unions fundamentally to blame for that?
I think it was overwhelmingly the union barons. As I say, they didn't in fact represent their membership in those days. Policy could change 180 degrees with the change of a union leader.
And they weren't always elected by one person, one vote?
No, until it wasn't really. I mean, one of the biggest struggles we had in the trade union movement was getting the unions to behave democratically inside their own organisation.
When you look back at that time, though, at the Treasury, I mean, this was a time when you, or the government, you laid down what every pay rise should be, you laid down what the price rises should be.
Absolutely.
And then you took either 83% or 98% away of affluent people's income. I mean, when you look back, what do you think of all that?
I think it was ridiculous. But the country wanted us to do things which required a hell of a lot of public spending, and spending has to be financed out of taxation.
But you must have known when you were at the Treasury, that when you taxed people at 83% or 98%...
Oh, it was ridiculous.
They never paid it.
Oh, it was
they found ways around it.
Immensely damaging, and of course you got an enormous amount of tax evasion, not just tax avoidance, but people holding their money abroad rather than in the UK, that sort of thing.
Wasn't this the economics of the madhouse that paved the way for Margaret Thatcher?
I think it was two things. It was, first of all, the welfare state came to be seen as a nanny state, and the public began to feel that it was a great mistake to raise such money in taxation in order to finance social spending in areas in which the bulk of people often had no interest whatever. I think that was the main thing. And, of course, the union problem.
When you lost the election, when Labour lost the election in 1979, Mrs. Thatcher came to power for the first time. When that happened, and she didn't win by a huge majority, but at the time, did you realise that was a watershed, that your party could be out for a long time?
Oh, I think so. I mean, Jim Callaghan, who was the Prime Minister at the time, said to me, I always remember this, you know, Denis, there's been a secular change in politics. And one of the big changes was people didn't want the nanny state anymore. They would rather spend their money as they wanted to themselves rather than let the state spend it for them.
After that defeat, which, as you say, turned out to be a watershed, and then you saw the rise of the left in the Labour Party, were you too exhausted to fight the left?
Oh, no, I fought them very hard indeed. And when I was, for example, running for deputy leader, I spent my whole time going around the country having arguments with the left. And it wasn't just the ordinary left of the Labour Party. There were Trotskyites who were practicing a policy of what they called entryism.
Infiltrating the party.
Trying to get control of local Labour parties so that they could choose the candidates in the election and that sort of thing. And we had a terrible problem, and it was partly, again, because we didn't have, effectively, one man, one vote.
One commentator said that you had a reputation as a fighter. You were a bruiser.
Yes.
Like that. But that you didn't fight enough when the party most needed you?
I know they say that, but I don't really agree with that. Well, I mean, you could say I didn't because I didn't win, if you like. But I fought very hard indeed, and I mean, I had never had any spare time at all because I was going all round the country talking to trade union branches, constituency parties, regional conferences and so on.
So how could you lose in the leadership battle to Michael Foot, who was seen by certainly most non-Labour people as unelectable as a British Prime Minister?
Well, I think it was basically that the union barons, for example, decided they wanted to move to the left, although their rank and file didn't. And we got a lot of evidence accumulated, which I describe in my book, that the union barons were supporting left-wing policies which their own members were strongly hostile to. And I think parties in opposition tend to go for people on their own extreme.
You almost lost in the deputy leadership to Tony Benn.
Absolutely.
Who you yourself have said almost destroyed the Labour Party.
Everybody, in fact, claims that my victory saved the Labour Party, and I think it did. The trade unions were dominated at that time by left-wingers, and the bulk of constituency parties, which represented only a fraction of the voters in each constituency, the average membership. In fact, the average attendance at constituency party meetings was about 20, in a constituency where 20,000 people voted Labour.
So they were unrepresentative in your
Yes, I think they were.
As all this was going on, and as your party was in the midst of a huge takeover battle with the left in the constituencies and in the unions, I know you didn't do it, but was there ever a time when you did contemplate defecting to the SDP, the Social Democrats?
Well, I was asked to, of course, continuously, but I was certain that it would never come to anything except produce more Tory seats. Because
maybe would have done if you had joined.
I don't think so. It would have maybe have done a little better, but the plain fact is that they were a very odd group of people. Roy Jenkins just wanted to be top. He had no particular policy position on anything. And the other members of Shirley Williams, they were all very different. And David Owen, of course, was totally never part of a team. That was one problem, that the opposition to the Labour Party from inside the Labour Party were always fighting one another as much as they were fighting the bulk of the Labour Party.
And yet you stayed in a party which in many ways has ended up to the right of what the Social Democrats stood for in the 1980s.
Yes, but society has changed incomparably since then. I mean, as I said, everybody regards themselves now as middle class. They don't want to save the world anymore. They want to save the whale. They're not terribly interested in foreign policy, with the one exception really being Iraq. And
because our soldiers are there.
Because our soldiers are there, of course. And partly also, I think, EMU, there's some public interest in that.
In economic and monetary union.
Yes, that's right, yes.
Let me ask you this. Has Tony Blair made the Labour Party too moderate?
I don't think so. I think he represents what the bulk of the party is now. I mean, it's very interesting. I spoke for two young Labour candidates in hopeless by-elections they were bound to lose. One was Blair at Beaconsfield, the other was Brown at Rosyth in Scotland. And I saw each of them as a future Prime Minister because they represented the society as it was changing and Labour as it was changing. And I think that I don't agree. I think Blair started very well indeed. I've often expressed my belief that in the last 2 years he'd made one mistake